Tom parks the car on an empty street in a town that seems forgotten by time. The engine hums softly, filling the uncomfortable silence that hangs in the air. At that moment, the hot, dry wind lifts dust along the deserted streets, while the late afternoon sun casts long, sad shadows across the worn asphalt. He turns off the car with a long sigh, his hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. Sarah, sitting next to him in her wheelchair, looks at him, confused. Is this it? Her voice is fragile, still full of hope. She always believed in Tom, believed he was fighting for something bigger, that the difficulties they faced were only temporary obstacles. But something in his posture, in the way he avoids meeting her eyes, makes her heart tighten painfully. I need to go. Take care of some things, Tom mumbles, finally opening the car door. The metallic sound echoes down the empty street. I won't be long. Sarah frowns, sensing something dark in the air. Tom's usual smile, the one that always comforted her, is gone. He seems distant, as if he's already far away, even though he's physically right beside her. She tries to move her fingers, as if that simple gesture could push away the growing sense of despair. Tom, wait. You're leaving me here alone? Her question comes out more desperate than she intended, her voice breaking at the end. He finally turns to face her, but his eyes don't meet hers. They're fixed on some distant point, as if he's struggling with a decision too heavy to bear. It's just for a little while. I promise I'll be back. He tries to sound convincing, but his tone is empty, without conviction. He pushes Sarah's wheelchair toward the small house ahead, an old, time-worn structure. The windows are foggy, the doors creak, and the garden is overrun with weeds. The house looks as abandoned as she feels in that moment. Sarah watches as he walks back to the car. Each step he takes feels like a blow, tearing away a part of her trust, of her hope. She tries to hold back the tears, but they slip out silently, tracing thin lines down her cheeks. Tom. Her voice is barely a whisper now. He gets into the car without looking back. The engine starts again, and for a second, Sarah feels a surge of pure desperation. He'll come back. He promised. She repeats to herself, as if those words were a mantra that could chase away the fear settling in her chest. But as the car disappears into the horizon, taking with it the last shred of security she knew, Sarah is left alone. Her only company now is the growing shadows and the oppressive silence surrounding her. She looks at the house in front of her, as if it's the only thing standing between her and absolute emptiness. What she doesn't know yet is that Tom doesn't plan to return. And now, alone in that forgotten town, Sarah has to figure out how to survive. Sarah looked around, trying to understand where she had been left. The streets were empty, except for a few old cars parked randomly, rusted as if they hadn't moved in years. The silence was almost unbearable, broken only by the rustling of dry leaves dancing in the hot wind. It was as if the town was frozen in time, forgotten by everyone, even by the world itself. She slowly pushed her wheelchair along the uneven sidewalk, the loose stones making it difficult to move. Each meter felt like a monumental effort, not just physically, but because of the growing sense of helplessness enveloping her. The shop windows were dusty, some broken, others boarded up as if abandoned long ago. Closed forever, she read on a faded sign at a grocery store, the last remnant of a life that seemed to have left the place behind. For several blocks, Sarah didn't see a single living soul. When she finally spotted a figure in the distance, a bent elderly woman walking slowly with an empty shopping cart, she felt a small spark of hope. Maybe this person could give her some information, some comfort. "Excuse me, please," Sarah called out, her voice echoing louder than expected in the desolate emptiness. The woman turned slowly, her small, hardened eyes sweeping over Sarah from head to toe before continuing on her way without saying a word. The cart made an uncomfortable metallic sound as it scraped the asphalt, a sound that seemed to echo in Sarah's heart. She tried again. "Please, I'm trying to find help. Do you know of any place that—" But the woman was already far away, her hunched back disappearing around the corner without looking back. The silent disregard was a blow Sarah hadn't expected. The few people she saw from that moment on were like ghosts. Quick, distrustful glances, hurried steps, no one willing to help. As she continued through the abandoned streets, a cruel truth began to form in her mind. It wasn't just the town that seemed empty. It was as if life itself had been drained from this place. There were no services, no shops open, and the few houses still standing looked as tired as she felt. Sarah paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. The weight of Tom's abandonment pressed down harder on her shoulders. She was alone. Completely alone. And in this town forgotten by time, the only person she could rely on was herself. The shadows of the crumbling buildings surrounded her, and Sarah knew that from this point on, surviving would not just be a matter of luck, it would require sheer resilience. Sarah kept exploring the desolate streets, trying to ignore the growing weight of loneliness. As she struggled to push her wheelchair over a cracked sidewalk, a raspy voice came from an alley beside her. "Girl, you shouldn't be here." Sarah quickly turned and saw an elderly woman, dressed in tattered clothes with a piercing gaze. She approached slowly, a cane tapping the stone ground with a dry, echoing sound. Her white hair was poorly tied in a loose bun, and her wrinkles told the story of someone who had seen more than she cared to. "Are you lost?" the woman asked, stopping a few feet from Sarah, her eyes studying her every move. "In a way, yes," Sarah replied, still catching her breath. "I'm trying to understand where I am. I don't know if my husband is coming back. I need help." The woman, who introduced herself as Dona Elza, shook her head slowly, her expression shifting from curiosity to something darker. "Here, no one will help you, girl. This town, it's been forgotten by God and men. Those who are still here, they stay for reasons you don't want to know." Those words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She had expected indifference or scorn, but there was something more in the old woman's eyes. A clear, direct warning. "Don't trust anyone," Dona Elza continued in a grave tone. "The people who remain here, they have secrets, and the more you search for answers, the more dangerous it becomes." Sarah tried to process what she had just heard, her heart racing. What she had started to realize about this town was only the surface. Something much deeper and darker lay behind it all. Without another word, Dona Elza turned and disappeared into the same alley from which she had come. As Sarah looked out at the empty street ahead, a wave of memories hit her like distant thunder. Her mind, perhaps searching for answers to the inexplicable, returned to moments with Tom, moments that at first glance seemed harmless. But now, with distance and pain, each one took on a new meaning. She remembered a night just a few months ago. Tom had arrived late, later than usual, his eyes restless, avoiding any kind of eye contact. When she asked him about it, he smiled nervously and said he had things to take care of. At the time, she had believed him. Tom had always been a man of few words, someone who never revealed much, but was always there for her. Or at least, that's what she had thought. There were also the mysterious phone calls he received late at night. Tom would rush out of the room muttering that it was work, or nothing important. But Sarah clearly remembered one time when she overheard him whispering names that sounded strange to her, secrets murmured with palpable tension in his voice. Then there were the meetings. Every now and then, he would leave her alone for a few hours, always with a hurried excuse that it was something last minute. And now, in this moment of solitude and abandonment, Sarah finally began to piece it all together. Something had been wrong for a long time, but she had chosen to ignore the signs. She had trusted him blindly, and now that trust had left her vulnerable. It was these details that now hammered in her mind, adding up like clues to a dark puzzle. What had Tom been hiding? And why, after so many years together, had he decided to leave her in this remote, eerie town? Fear took root even deeper. Darkness fell heavily that night, suffocating the few sounds of the ghost town. The wind howled through the cracks in the windows and the empty streets, but something else troubled Sarah's mind. She was sitting in her wheelchair, her hands trembling on the armrests, when a sound different from the wind made her body freeze. Footsteps, slow, dragging, passing near the house. Her heart began to pound in her chest, her senses heightened. Then a muffled laugh echoed outside, followed by a murmur. The words were indistinct, but they didn't sound friendly. Sarah tried to steady her breathing as she slowly leaned forward to peek out the window. Outside, under the dim light of a distant street lamp, she saw two figures moving among the shadows. They were speaking in hushed tones, occasionally glancing towards the house where she was. What did they want? Why were they so close? A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Her eyes scanned the area, searching for any additional movement. Further ahead, she noticed another person standing at the street corner. They seemed to be waiting, but for what? The feeling of being watched tightened around her like an invisible noose. The strangers continued their movements, sometimes drifting away, sometimes coming closer. One of the figures, a broad-shouldered man, paused for a moment and looked directly at the window. Sarah pulled back, holding her breath, her heart racing with fear. The danger was closer than ever. In that moment, she knew she couldn't just wait. There was no way of knowing what those people wanted, but one thing was certain. Staying in that house was no longer safe. She had to figure out a way to act before it was too late. The next morning, Sarah still felt the weight of the tension from the previous night. The unsettling silence of the town was interrupted only by her own restless thoughts. Something didn't add up. Tom's actions before abandoning her, the suspicious people lurking around. There was something deeper going on. Determined to find answers, she began searching the house. In one of the rooms, she found a bookshelf that seemed to have been moved recently. With effort, she pushed it aside, revealing a small door hidden in the wall, covered in dust and grime. Her trembling hands opened the door, uncovering a kind of hiding spot. Inside, there was a heavy metal box, covered in yellowed papers. When she opened it, her eyes widened. Inside were documents, contracts, bank transfers, and a series of transactions. Sarah picked up one of the papers, Tom's name boldly printed across it. He had used this isolated town as a hideout for illegal transactions. As her eyes skimmed the pages, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Tom hadn't left her there out of mere abandonment. He was involved in something much bigger, something dangerous. He had used the town as a front to hide his criminal activities. Sarah's throat went dry. Everything started to make sense. The strangers at night, Tom's behavior before he disappeared. Her husband wasn't the man she thought he was. He had betrayed her in ways deeper than she could have ever imagined. With her heart pounding, she realized she was in the middle of something that could cost her life. The question echoing in her mind was clear. Should she dig deeper or abandon everything and try to escape while she still could? Sarah decided she needed answers. She couldn't ignore what she had uncovered. Leaving the house with determination, she headed to the town's market, where she had seen one of the men involved in the suspicious activity the night before. He was tall, with a face marked by time and scars from a dangerous past. Confronting him, her heart was racing, but her voice didn't waver. "I know what's going on. I know about Tom and the illegal transactions. Now, I want to know why he left me here and what you're all hiding." The man laughed, a bitter sound that echoed down the empty street. "You shouldn't have messed with this girl. You don't know what you're getting into." His eyes narrowed, full of disdain, as he took a step towards her. "If you knew what was good for you, you would have disappeared by now." Sarah felt panic rising, but she held her ground. "What did he do to you? Why did he leave me here?" He stepped even closer, now inches away. "You won't make it out of here alive, Sarah. If I were you, I'd start praying." His words were a clear warning. She was being watched, and her time was running out. Sarah returned home, her heart pounding. The man's threatening words still echoed in her mind. As she settled into her chair, she heard a soft knock at the door. Cautiously, she opened it slowly and saw Dona Elza standing there, her face marked by time and the wisdom of someone who had seen too much. "Can I come in?" Dona Elza asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. Sarah hesitated, but the loneliness and fear of being completely alone made her step aside and let her in. Elza sat at the table and without hesitation said, "I know what your husband did. He thought he could use this town for his dirty business, but even he didn't know how deep it went. You can't trust anyone here, Sarah." Sarah felt a glimmer of hope, but suspicion was inevitable. "And why should I trust you?" she asked, crossing her arms. Elsa sighed, her eyes tired and full of stories. "Because I was deceived by this town too, and if you don't act fast, it will be too late." Doubt tightened in Sarah's chest. She knew she needed help, but how far could she trust this woman? Donna Elsa quickly whispered the plan, each word filled with urgency. They had to leave at night when the town was quieter, and use an old path Elsa knew, supposedly away from the watchful eyes of Tom's accomplices. Still unsure, Sarah agreed. There weren't many options. The two of them crept through the dark streets, the air thick with the smell of earth dampened by the recent rain. Each step seemed louder than the last, and the silence of the ghost town was nearly unbearable. When they finally reached the alley that would lead them out, something went terribly wrong. Lights appeared out of nowhere, blinding, and shouts echoed around them. "Run!" Elsa shouted, pushing Sarah forward. The hurried footsteps of the men behind them echoed through the night. Sarah's heart raced, her frail body fighting against the fear. Elsa stayed by her side, but the sound of the chase grew louder, as if time was running out. Sarah glanced at Elsa, questioning whether the woman could truly be trusted. Each breath became harder, and what had once seemed like a careful plan now felt like a nightmare. The words of one of the men chasing them pierced the night air like a sharp blade, cutting through Sarah. "Tom knew exactly what he was doing when he left you here. You were the perfect bait." Sarah froze, her world falling apart in fragments. Bait. It all started to make sense. The abandonment, the isolation, the choice of a deserted town. Tom hadn't just left her behind to protect himself. He had used her to throw his enemies off track. A wife in a wheelchair? Who would suspect? The pieces of the puzzle fell into place in a cruel, twisted way. She looked at Elsa, her face clearly showing shock. Everything she had been through, the lonely nights, the constant fear, it was all part of a larger, filthy plan in which she was just a pawn. Her heart clenched, not only from the betrayal but from the deliberate cruelty. He had manipulated her emotions, her trust, her love. The weight of this revelation made her falter. The shadows around her seemed to grow, suffocating, and the chase felt like a distant echo. In that moment, all that mattered was the cold truth laid bare. Tom would have sacrificed her without a second thought. Sarah's breathing was heavy, the night's chill biting at her skin, but her resolve burned like an unquenchable flame. She knew that the time for running was over. It wasn't just about escaping the town anymore. It was about confronting the truth, exposing those who had kept her prisoner, mentally and physically. In the distance, Tom's accomplices were getting closer, their voices growing louder, and the darkness seemed to conspire against her. But Sarah was no longer afraid. Somehow the weight of the betrayal made her stronger, fueling her courage. "You won't control me anymore," she whispered to herself, her fists clenched. Donna Elsa tried to stop her, but Sarah, determined, had already broken free from the invisible chains that bound her. She was no longer the helpless woman who had been abandoned in that remote town. With one final look of defiance, she stepped out of her hiding place, intentionally exposing herself, knowing the final confrontation would be risky but necessary. It was an act of sacrifice, a risk she had to take. The looming danger didn't intimidate her anymore. Now it was about justice, about fighting for herself and her freedom. Nothing would stop her from revealing the truth. Sarah handed over the documents with trembling but steady hands. The authorities watched, intrigued by the weight of the revelations. The town, once shrouded in mystery, was beginning to unravel its secrets, one by one. The evidence Tom had hidden was undeniable, and the scandal began to unfold. He could no longer hide in the shadows of his betrayal. As the investigation progressed, Sarah felt a growing sense of lightness. It wasn't a feeling of complete victory, but more like a burden lifted from her shoulders. The relief of knowing that her fight had been worth it, contrasted with the deep scars she would carry forever. Alone in her small, temporary room, she looked out the window, seeing the soft light of dawn. The town, once her prison, now seemed less threatening, almost peaceful. But inside her, the emotional weight still lingered. Tom had been exposed, his accomplices punished, and she was free. But physical freedom didn't heal internal wounds. The path to healing would be long, but for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt hope. A quiet hope, but real. Did you like the story? Comment below what you thought, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this.